39%. That's how much water stopped reaching the Great Salt Lake. 39% gone. The lake dropped 22 feet, lost more than half its surface. 2,300 square miles shrank to 926. And the people who were supposed to fix Utah's dying rivers? They didn't hire engineers. They didn't pour concrete. They didn't break ground on some billion-dollar megaproject. They took a rodent, drove it out into the desert, and let it go. Sit with that. A buck-toothed, paddle-tailed rodent dropped into one of the most brutal landscapes in North America, handed a problem that decades of human water management created and couldn't solve. It sounds like a joke. It shouldn't work. The smartest fix anyone could come up with for a modern, man-made disaster was an animal we nearly wiped off the map a century ago. And that's exactly why you need to see what happened next. Because what these animals did in one of the harshest stretches of desert in the country flips everything you assume about how you fix a broken landscape. If you like stories where the answer is the last thing anyone expected, the kind of story that makes you look at the natural world differently, subscribe right now because this one breaks every rule you think you know. Here's the setup. You have to understand what Utah's rivers used to be before you understand what was lost. They were the lifeblood of the desert, winding, lazy, spilling out into wetlands, soaking the meadows and shrubs along their banks. Picture a healthy river, not as a pipe, but as a slow garden hose left running on a low trickle, water seeping out everywhere it touches, feeding everything around it. The bends and curves created modest but real wetlands. For that climate, those ecosystems were rich. That's what Utah had. Then came the middle of the last century, and everything changed. And it changed for reasons that, honestly, are hard to argue with. People needed to grow crops, set up fields and pastures, support industry, build a life in a dry place. And all of that needs one thing above everything else: water. So they took it. From the rivers, canals, dams, irrigation systems, all pulling the lifeblood out of the waterways. And here's what that did. The rivers that were once wandering garden hoses got straightened into fire hoses. Narrow trenches blasting water straight through at speed, never lingering, never spreading, never feeding a single thing along the way. The water was still moving, but it had stopped doing its job. And then nature piled on, the way it always does at the worst possible time. Research from the University of Utah looked at the years from 1979 to 2023, and what they found in the state's eastern mountains is the kind of slow-motion problem that's easy to ignore until it's too late. The peak snowpack shrank. The amount of water stored as snow each year dropped 16%, and the date that snowpack peaks shifted nearly 9 days earlier because the winters kept warming. Now, why does that matter? Because that snowpack is the savings account. It's the water the mountains store up all winter and slowly release in spring. Shrink the savings, melt it earlier, and you get weaker spring runoff. Less water, released at the wrong time. Streams that used to flow all season start drying up. And then there's fire. Here's where it gets worse. In 2007, the Milford Flat Fire tore through 567 square miles. Let me make that real. That's an area bigger than the entire city of Los Angeles, burning, forests gone. And critically, the vegetation along the streams and creeks, the roots that hold riverbanks together, gone. That same year, the Neola North Fire took another 68 square miles. Smaller, but it played its part. And here's the part nobody tells you about wildfire, the part that turns a fire into a water crisis. After the flames pass, the soil loses its ability to hold water. The burned ground goes hard and water repellent. So the next time it rains, instead of soaking in, that rain sheets straight off the slope and flushes tons of sediment directly into the riverbeds. The banks erode, new gullies carve themselves into the land, and the rivers narrow, not by a little, several times over. A wide river valley with shallows and little islands becomes a single tight ditch where the water just rushes, non-stop, touching nothing. You want the number that makes it official? The United States has the Clean Water Act, and inside it there's a status called impaired. It means a river or stream or lake fails to meet the state's water quality standards. It can't support the life it's supposed to support. As of 2022, out of roughly 41,000 miles of assessed rivers and streams in Utah, nearly 11,800 miles came back impaired. Do the math on that. 28%. More than 1 mile in every 4 of Utah's flowing water can no longer properly hold life. Let that sink in. That's not a stretch of bad river. That's a quarter of the state's entire bloodstream. And the Great Salt Lake, that's the scoreboard. That's where you read the final result of everything upstream. There's a photo of it from 1987, and it is visibly, dramatically larger than what's there now. Since 1850, the amount of water flowing into that lake has dropped by that 39%. From 1986 to 2022, the water level fell 22 feet, hitting a record low of 3,940 feet above sea level. The surface shrank from almost 2,300 square miles down to just 926. More than half the lake gone. But here's why that's not just sad. Here's why it's genuinely dangerous. And this is the part that should make the hair on your neck stand up. The Great Salt Lake has no outflow. None. Water flows in, but it never flows out. It only evaporates. That's why it's salty, and that's why it's a trap. Every bit of sediment the rivers carry in, decades of farm runoff, industrial waste, everything, has nowhere to go. So it just piles up on the bottom and sits there, buried, harmless, as long as it stays underwater. But drop the water level 22 feet, expose more than half the lake bed, and all of that gets uncovered. Now it's dry. Now the wind can pick it up. And now a shrinking lake isn't just an ecological loss. It's a public health threat, a toxic dust source aimed straight at the lungs of everyone who lives nearby. The shrinking lake isn't the disaster. It's the warning light flashing on the dashboard. So now you understand the size of the problem. Thousands of miles of broken river, a dying lake, a warming climate stacking the deck. So how do you fix something this big? You've got options. You could spend an absolute fortune on river and stream restoration programs. You could hire crews to plant millions of streamside seedlings by hand, one at a time. Expensive. Slow. Or, and stay with me here, because this is the turn. You could hand the entire job to an animal that has been doing exactly this work, for free, for millions of years. An animal that doesn't need a budget, a contract, or a single day off. Beavers, nature's engineers. In 2019 and 2020, scientists from the University of Utah picked their target, the Price River, one of eastern Utah's most depleted arteries, a waterway worn down and drying out. And they set out to bring it back to life using beavers and to study every step of the process. They found their candidates, and they did not just toss them in a truck. Each animal went through a 3-day quarantine at a rehab center, got checked for disease, got fitted with a microchip and a radio transmitter, so the researchers could track nature's engineers everywhere they went. And then, in the right spot, they let them go. It looked like the opening of a beautiful story. A river reborn in a dry desert. And it was. But first, those beavers had to survive. Because here's where it gets brutal. Utah does not care about your science project. The same climate strangling the rivers is just as merciless to the animals sent to save them. The long drought dried one of the study sites up completely. Gone. Summer temperatures sat above 100 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks, sometimes months. Stack on top of that the raw stress of being relocated to unfamiliar ground, and then add the predators. Predators who absolutely do not understand the noble purpose behind this research, who look at every one of these beavers and see exactly one thing: food. And in the end, some of the released beavers didn't make it. That's the honest truth of it. And others showed precisely why every single beaver got a microchip and a tracker. Because, searching for anywhere more survivable, a few of them fled the chosen restoration zone and traveled as far as 12 miles downstream. 12 miles. Picture being dropped into a furnace and walking the length of a half marathon, in the heat, just to find a spot where you won't die. And the ones that stayed? Here's the part that gets me. They built anyway. Branches, sticks, whatever they could find. And when there weren't enough branches, they used stones. Researchers actually watched one of these rodents roll a rock into place, something that honestly should not be anywhere in a beaver's natural playbook. They improvised, they adapted, and out of that stubborn, against all odds effort came the one single thing those degrading Utah waterways were starving for: dams. Now here's the kicker, and this is where you find out why one pile of sticks in the right place can do what millions of dollars of engineering couldn't: drop a barrier into a riverbed, and the very first thing that happens is the current slows down. The studies measured it precisely. The water dropped from about 3 feet per second down to somewhere between 1 and 1.6 feet per second. Cut the speed of water in half, and you cut its power to do damage. Slow water loses its ability to rip soil and stones off the bottom and the banks. So that beaver dam isn't just a tangle of branches, it's an anti-erosion machine, dropped right into the middle of a river that was, quite literally, bleeding out from erosion. And then the second thing happens. The water, blocked, has to go somewhere, so it spreads out, looking for any way around. And that's how ponds form. They're even named after the builders: beaver ponds. And inside those ponds, something quietly miraculous goes on. The silt, the sand, the organic matter, everything the river was carrying in its rush, it all finally slows down and settles. The bottom levels out. The banks build back up because the rising water lets sediment settle along the edges. Remember those eroded trenches that replaced the real rivers? The beavers on the Price River are, slowly, dragging those trenches back toward factory settings, rebuilding the shallows, the spread, the shape that the straightening and the fires stripped away. The river starts to look like a river again. And it doesn't stop there, because where the water spreads over a wider area, the ground nearby stays damp. And in bone-dry Utah, where there wasn't a speck of green, damp ground means life starts to sprout. Plants take hold. And here's the chain reaction that follows. Where there are wetland plants and still water, insects breed, including the ones that bite us all summer: mosquitoes, who love stagnant water. But they can't multiply unchecked because the wetland brings predators for them. Amphibians, frogs, lizards, show up, thrilled to find both the food and the still water conditions they need. Then, bigger creatures arrive. Birds, who feed on the amphibians and the insects, and for whom a wetland is breakfast, lunch, dinner, and everything in between. One pond, built by a rodent, becomes a hotspot of biodiversity in the middle of a desert. And if you doubt that, look at the Great Salt Lake itself. As salty as it is, along its eastern and northern edges there are freshwater and saltwater wetlands, and those areas are critically important habitat for millions of migrating sandpipers and other water birds all across western North America. The list of species is genuinely long, and here's the giveaway: those birds would never have chosen a place with no other life, no food. The birds are proof the whole web is there. Now, I want to be straight with you, because this is the part the hype merchants always skip, and it's the part that actually matters. On the Price River, the big lush green payoff hasn't really shown up yet. Not enough time has passed, and the climate hasn't offered an ounce of mercy. Some of the beavers died, some of them left. This is a small, hard, genuinely complicated project. Run in conditions everyone admits are far from ideal, and there is no guarantee, none, that it ends in triumph. Anyone selling you beavers saved Utah right now is lying to you. What the researchers actually have is a promising start under punishing conditions, not a victory lap. And I'm telling you that on purpose because here's the irony: it makes everything else more believable, not less. The channels that overpromise are the ones that get nuked. The truth holds up. But now, here's the twist that reopens the whole thing. Because a beaver pond doesn't just slow water down, it buries it. The water spreads out, sits on the land far longer than it ever would in a fast channel, and instead of flushing away, it seeps down, recharging the aquifer underneath. The stream turns into a hydrological sponge, soaking up and storing serious amounts of water underground. How much? Studies in Colorado found that within a radius of about 164 feet of beaver dams, groundwater levels rose 3 to 5 feet. Now, on its own, that might not sound like much. But here's the thing: a beaver never builds just one dam, and it never makes just one pond. Multiply that sponge across dozens of dams along a stretch of river, and you're storing a genuinely significant volume of water in the ground. And then comes the payoff during a drought. That stored groundwater slowly gets released back into the stream, keeping the flow steady when everything around it is dying. A river that waters itself, built by a rodent, for free. And it gets better, because that same wet, spread-out land does something else. It resists fire. There's a study from 2020, not in Utah but in other states, that tracked how beaver activity changes the outcome of a wildfire. They used a measure called NDVI, an index of vegetation density, basically how green the land is. And what they found is striking. When the fires came through, the drop in greenness was 3 times bigger in areas without beavers than in areas with them. The beaver-engineered land stayed wet enough to hold on through the burn, so the very same animal fixing the erosion is also, quietly, fireproofing the valley around it. Now, here's the honest catch on the lake, because it matters and I won't skip it. In the short term, beaver dams actually reduce flow. By definition, they hold water back in ponds, which means, in theory, they could make the lake situation temporarily worse before it gets better. And on top of that, the Price River isn't even a tributary of the Great Salt Lake, so this specific project won't directly affect that lake at all. The researchers are clear-eyed about this. They still have a lot of testing to do. The real open question, the one hanging over all of this, is whether beavers, deployed at scale, could one day help save that lake. And nobody knows the answer yet. That uncertainty isn't a weakness in the story. It's the entire reason the work is being done. And here's the thing. The researchers on the Price River are not rushing. They're not drawing grand conclusions. Yes, the beavers settled in. Yes, they've already improved a degrading stretch of river. But everyone involved knows the conditions are tough, the project is complicated, and there's no promise of a fairy tale ending. What they have figured out, though, is something clever. How to help the beavers along even in these brutal conditions, and the way they do it is wild. You turn people into beavers. Not literally, obviously, but the experts wanted to give the beavers a head start by building like beavers. So they use natural materials straight from the local landscape. Branches, parts of trees, stones, the same stuff a beaver would use, nothing that harms the ecosystem. The difference is that people have tools. To make one of these artificial starter dams, they hammer raw wooden posts into the riverbed, then weave thin, flexible branches through them, creating a permeable barrier. And then they stop, because that's where the human part ends. Why bother if beavers can build the whole thing themselves? Because this gives the beavers a foundation, a head start, a reason to roll up their sleeves and start using those incredible engineering instincts right away. And of course, more beaver releases are planned, so the work continues. And this is the part that surprises people. Reintroducing beavers in Utah is not some brand new, one-off experiment. The state has been at this. Back in the 2000s, a massive landslide carved its way down a mountainside and wiped out a local beaver population that had been key to that whole region thriving. So in 2022, biologists from Utah State University, Hill Air Force Base, and the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources decided to bring them back. And they did the same trick. First, the researchers spent a few hours building basic starter dams by hand, smoothing the way for the future residents. Then they released 7 beavers, including 2 adults, into ground that was completely new to them. The goal? The same as always. Restore the landscape, prevent wildfire, help the plants grow, rebuild the ecosystem. And with that many experts involved, it's hard to believe they'd launch something like this unless they were fairly confident it would work. Beavers, after all, have a solid track record of getting the job done. And that's just one project. There are plenty more. In fact, Utah has an entire organization built around this, the Beaver Ecology and Relocation Collaborative, nicknamed the Beaver Bunkhouse, that handles everything beaver-related in the state. Here's the clever part. Beavers are brilliant for restoring ecosystems, but they can also cause real headaches, flooding crops, swamping pastures, threatening roads. And that's where a lot of people just want them gone. So the bunkhouse steps in. They catch the most enthusiastic builders, the ones causing trouble, and instead of killing them, they give them a short stay in a quarantine bungalow, a checkup, their shots. And once the vets confirm the animal is healthy, the best part begins. The beaver heads off on a journey, not to a zoo, to exactly the kind of place that needs it most: a tired, eroded, drying out riverbed, a forgotten stretch of stream where it can finally put its skills to use without upsetting a single farmer. And they don't just dump them and hope. The team studies each beaver family closely: who's digging burrows where, what trees they prefer, what population density works best to fight erosion. And through all that careful work, they're building something bigger than healthy rivers. They're building partnerships with Utah's Division of Wildlife Resources, with local farmers, with landowners, all of them learning how to live in harmony with beaver engineering instead of fighting it. And that, in the end, is the thing that keeps everyone happy: the rivers, the ecosystems, the beavers, and the people. Because here's the lesson, and it's so much bigger than one rodent and one river. We spent a century straightening our rivers, draining our lakes, and burning the banks that held it all together. And then we went looking for some expensive, high-tech, modern fix for the mess we made. We assumed the answer had to be huge and complicated and costly. And the whole time, the answer had buck teeth and a flat tail. Not a machine, not a billion-dollar program. An animal we nearly erased from the continent, doing the one thing it has always done: around the clock, for free, with no salary and no off switch. The future of Utah's water might not be poured in concrete after all. It might be built out of mud and sticks by something the size of a house cat, working through the night in a riverbed nobody was watching. And that future isn't some far-off fantasy. It's already happening. It's in the water right now, getting wet, getting built, one branch at a time. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want your answer below. When the smartest solution to a modern, man-made disaster turns out to be an animal we almost wiped off the planet, what else are we spending fortunes trying to fix that nature already knows how to do for free if we just get out of the way? Tell me what comes to mind. And if you want more stories where the answer comes from the very last place you'd ever think to look, subscribe, because the next one will surprise you just as much.